There are some significant differences between these two books, and in this video we're going to look at one of those differences, and that is what is the difference between the third edition of Mounce's Basics of Biblical Greek and the fourth edition of Mounce's Basics of Biblical Greek when it comes to the middle voice. I'm Daryl Burling from Master New Testament Greek, here to help you with the tools, habits, and system to master the Greek of the New Testament, to go all the way to reading fluency. If that sounds like you, go ahead, hit the subscribe button, and then hit the notify bell to be notified when new videos are released. Well, earlier this year, this book was released. This is the fourth edition of Mounce's Basics of Biblical Greek. This book has a number of significant changes between this and the third edition that came before it. One significant change is the way that it treats the middle voice. Now, in the third edition of Mounce's Basics of Biblical Greek, the middle voice is treated twice. The first one is in chapter 18, where he talks about deponent verbs rather than middle voice verbs specifically, and that means that they are middle in form but active in meaning. Okay, and so in that sense, he encourages you and I, the students, to read these as simply active verbs. Now, from a pedagogical perspective, it kind of makes that chapter rather easy. The second thing he does in chapter 25, he has a second piece to the discussion of deponent verbs, and there, after discussing the perfect tense form of the verb, he gives a fuller understanding of the middle voice, and there he talks about how that the middle voice often has the idea of subject affectedness, but he still downplays that and said in 75% of instances where you find a middle voice verb in the New Testament, that sense will be deponent, therefore it's active. And so this is a significant change and worth just explaining why it came to be and what he's done in the fourth edition. First up, let's talk briefly about why this change was necessary. Now, deponency seems to have been an idea that's been imported from Latin. And so in Greek, the idea of deponency and understanding that it's not native to the language. In fact, going all the way back to 1908 in the third edition of Moulton's grammar, he reluctantly adopts the idea of deponency. Later grammars begin to question it. Robertson in the 1930s questions whether this should be a category at all. Other scholars throughout the 20th century have also expressed the same concern. Even in Wallace's book, Greek Grammar Beyond the Basics, he has a much more nuanced understanding of the middle voice there and doesn't really even talk about deponent verbs, at least not with the same emphasis. By the time we get to 2010, we have the SBL conference in November 2010. There was a discussion between four scholars, Bernard Taylor, Constantine Campbell, Jonathan Pennington, and Stanley Porter, who all discussed deponency, its relevance to Koine Greek, and uniformly, and this is unusual, but unanimously argued against deponency and said deponency as a category, as a way of thinking about the middle voice in Koine Greek, should be dropped. And so what comes out of this is that a general scholarly consensus that in Koine Greek, deponency should be rejected. After this time, there's been a number of discussions backwards and forwards, but largely this consensus has grown. And this consensus has grown to the point that other Greek scholars, such as Rodney Decker, Stanley Porter, and their beginning Greek grammars have dropped deponency entirely. And there are other grammars, either just come out or about to come out, that do much the same thing. So in 2019, when the fourth edition of Mounce's Basics of Biblical Greek is released, we find the deponent discussion, the discussion around deponent verbs, is gone. And so this is, in my opinion, the right thing to do. It's got enough consensus, and the uniformity of that consensus is significant enough that it is time that deponency is dropped from Greek grammars. And I think it's super important to recognize that if the deponency had not been dropped in this edition of Mounce's Basics of Biblical Greek, then there's a good chance that that would be an inhibitor to the adoption of this book as a grammar. I know that when I was looking at Greek grammars for first year Greek to teach Greek and Master New Testament Greek, I strongly considered whether I should continue to use this. We do use Mounce's Basics of Biblical Greek still. I nuanced the discussion significantly, but I was very tempted to use Rod Decker's Reading Koine Greek. So in the fourth edition, deponency is gone, and there's an updated presentation. So in the fourth edition, we have an updated presentation when it comes to the middle voice. Deponency is gone, and that's the right thing to do. If deponency had not been removed from this edition of the Basics of Biblical Greek, I personally am convinced that that would have been an inhibitor to the adoption of the 4th edition going forward, because there's such a strong agreement now amongst scholars that deponency should be dropped that it's going to be very hard to argue that from a pedagogical perspective that as a teacher I should be teaching deponency to my students. I can't see that happening, especially when there are so many Greek grammars now either out or coming out that don't teach deponency and teach against it. This is going to lead to confusion, and so the removal of it from this edition is a good thing. The second reason, of course, it's a good thing is it gives you a better understanding of the middle voice in Greek. Now, of course, the challenge for this, for us as generally English speakers, is that we don't have an English middle voice. We have an active voice and we have a passive voice, but there's no middle voice at all. And so that makes it a little difficult for us to transfer the middle voice into English. Now, one of the ways that has been recognized as being part of the middle voice is that the middle voice has this idea of subject effectiveness. And in the 4th edition, that is the primary mission that Mounce has, is to help you understand that the middle voice provides you with this idea of subject effectiveness. Now, one area, and in fact this is one of the challenges with the middle voice, is that there's still work to be done. But Mounce helpfully has a little addendum in here within chapter 18 where he explains that often the middle voice is used with verbs of grooming. Now, I think we can modify that a little bit. I think he's on the right track, but I think it needs to be broadened out a little bit more. So verbs talking about, say, washing oneself, like baptizo in the middle voice, that has the idea of washing oneself. And so that he talks about as a verb of grooming. So what we see in that case is that the lexeme itself lends itself to the middle voice because the lexeme is working on the subject as well as the subject doing the acting. But grooming is too narrow. I think self-care is a broader category. So for instance, in Mark chapter 14, verse 54, Peter there is warming himself, and he uses the verb thermainominos, right? There's a participle in the middle voice to say he's warming himself. Now, he's not grooming himself, but there's still this concept of self-care, keeping warm, right? So self-care is one of those verbal ideas where if the lexeme lends itself to self-grooming or self-care, then this is a lexeme that does lend itself to the middle voice and therefore should be interpreted with that idea. The middle voice makes total sense. But of course, in English, we were going to have to use a reflexive pronoun to reflect that. But that's not because of the Greek. That's because of the English, and the English requires a reflexive pronoun. And so there's a really helpful discussion in chapter 18 of this to talk about the middle voice. Now, the challenge with this and the net effect of all of these changes is that, of course, it's the right thing to do, but it does increase the complexity of chapter 18. Okay, chapter 18, you used to be told that deponent verbs are deponent verbs, and therefore they're middle in form and active in meaning, and you used to say, okay, I get that, that's easy, move on. But now you get a much more complex and comprehensive discussion of the middle voice in chapter 18. So if you're a teacher or if you're a student, you want to take a little more time to understand the middle voice there. And the reason for that is that's the only time in this 4th edition you're going to come into contact with teaching about the middle voice. There used to be, in the 3rd edition, you'd also get this fuller discussion of the middle voice in chapter 25 after you've encountered the perfect tense. You don't get that. Chapter 25 now only covers the perfect tense, and once you're done with perfect, you're done with that chapter. And so everything's been put into chapter 18, which makes chapter 18 a more important chapter and also makes chapter 25 much easier than it already was. Now, the key thing with this is that if you're teaching or if you're a student of Biblical Greek and you're looking at this, when you go through and learn the middle voice properly the first time and you don't learn that it's a deponent, therefore active, and you understand that this is a verb where the subject is affected by his own action, then that makes the text of the Greek much richer. It gives you a better understanding of how the language is working, and when it comes to your exegesis and interpretation, you're going to have a better understanding of how that works because you're no longer flattening out the middle voice so that it matches English. Okay, you're seeing that the Greek middle voice has something different to offer. So I hope that's been helpful. The comment section of this video is a place where I want to encourage you to give me your impressions of the 4th edition of Mounce's Biblical Greek. And if you want to hear more about the distinctions between the 3rd edition and the 4th edition, or about Biblical Greek in general, then leave a comment below and let me know. And I look forward to interacting with you there, but also producing a video in the future based on your suggestion and your request that you leave in the comments below. If you're interested in learning to read the Greek of the New Testament fluently, then can I encourage you to go to masterntgreek.com/roadmap and download the Master New Testament Greek Roadmap to Mastery today. This will lay out a plan for you to go from wherever you are to reading the Greek of the New Testament fluently, and along the way help you to avoid some of the pitfalls that you'll run into. If this video has been helpful, then hit the subscribe button and then hit the notify bell so that you know when new videos are released. And until the next video, keep taking small steps, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. See you soon.